How you doing? No. Probably wouldn't hurt if you don't mind being around, but because I'm without my coach here at the moment, I'm trying to figure out how to get the slides loaded.
All right, we'll figure it out.
What am I missing here?
All
In
right.
getting the room to display the slides. I'm in the room.
Yeah. So you need click these three options. Manage slides.
Yeah,
And why can't you?
that's really kind of the question. It's weird. Um,
To be honest, I'm not very good with data tracker, so
yeah, they changed this interface a bit, but you know what's interesting is it's not showing me as chair.
that seems to be potentially a problem.
That's the problem. I'm not listed as.
Are you?
Oh no, I am listed as the chair.
I'm not familiar with audio. Yeah, so I think we may need a hand.
I think so. I can't figure out how to get my slides up.
I'm getting set up. Yeah, I'll just you guys want to call and make sure they call. Thank you.
So welcome, folks. Maybe there's another chair in the room who might be able to take a look at what's going on here. I don't seem to have the ability to access slides and display them. So another working group chair who's already had their experience. Suzanne, you were just in your last session. I don't seem to be able to get access to my slides to make anything happen here. Yes, and I am on my own laptop and I'm in the room, but when I click on the three dots and it says manage your slides, and it won't let me do anything with the slides. Yes, it does show me in the participant list as being a chair.
I don't see them either on here.
I just have, well, one thing I can do is I can just load them directly off of my computer instead of trying to do them here. So I could do that.
We've contacted support already.
Yeah.
So I'll dance a little bit for you as we get started if you like. Yeah.
Oh, you know, this is interesting. So I asked it to load up the slides again. And so it loaded them up and put them in the list, but it won't let me display them. So I was able to put a duplicate copy out there, but I can't do anything with them.
Yeah, I do see two sets of feeding materials.
Yeah, I'm going to delete the second set there.
Oh, I should have gone to the chair training. The new tool.
All right, well, we are at start time. We're actually 4 minutes past at this point. We do have a little bit of extra time here. I don't know what to say about finding slides. Oh, you can put a note in chat here for support, right?
Is there no one in the room who's presented recently who's familiar with the latest MeetEcho tools? All right. Well, hello everyone. I'm your responsible area director, and I'm unable to help you with the slides at this point, so I apologize for that. I will familiarize myself with the latest version of MeetEcho tools. Oh, is that you?
No.
All right.
Well, there are supposed to be 2 slide decks available. I mean, all I can really do is speak to my slide deck for today. You know, the first few slides are the obvious note well slides that are typically there. Oh, here comes a deck. Somebody is putting a deck up. Not me, though.
I was on there always trying to help.
Okay, well, good. There's obviously the note well is always the first slide that's up. And oh, I should probably start by saying this is registrations extensions working group. I am your co-chair. Antoine Bouchard is not able to be with us. And as Ari just said, the area director has kindly come up here to see if he can help me out and at least help keep things going. So that's good. Today, we have two meetings this week. Today is just an hour-long meeting. It is essentially an administrative meeting, if you will. So we're going to go through our usual litany, looking at all of our documents and status of things. We have one material discussion to be had, and then we have a 2-hour session available to us on Wednesday when we will be having a half a dozen different technical discussions or some more in-depth discussions about a number of the documents and topics that we have in front of us. So the note well, oh, there we go.
I got
So
it.
there's something.
I think.
Okay. So that's the first note well document. This is simply a reminder that, you know, the IETF processes are a public process, and you really do need to, you know, decide for yourself what all of these guidelines and regulations and rules about how we work, what their impact is on you. The couple of notable ones here are just the process in general, and of course the patent issues, and being able to, you know, pay attention to IETF preferences in that kind of space. Um, the next slide is a note really well to remind us that, you know, this is a technical meeting and it should be about the substance of technology. And we need to learn to focus on doing the work at hand. It is entirely inappropriate to, in any way, you know, reference, take advantage of, or in any way, you know, be inappropriate with other people. And that just includes being harassing in any form. So please do take note of that. We do have an ombuds team for anyone who has any issues like that. You're welcome to, this in my case, you can certainly come to the chair if you have issues with anyone here. But the ombuds team is available if you have any issues in that regard. And then on the next slide, a reminder about our code of conduct. Um, the usual treating everybody with respect, which we were just sort of covering, speaking slowly, of course, and please do use the tool, either the in-room tool or the online tool for using the queue and getting up to speak. It has very helpful opportunity to clearly display your name so we know who you are. Um, and just remember that we are working for the good overall of the internet. So thank you. Agenda bashing, here is our list of things. This is largely a pro forma agenda, but this is your opportunity to jump in if you want to add anything or change things here. The last item on the list is the one extra discussion that we'll be having. It is a material discussion, but it's really largely a process discussion. So we'll see how we feel about all that now. We were,
One other
oh, I'm
point.
sorry.
Do we have a note taker for this session? I'd like to make sure that we have adequate notes for the meeting. So would anyone be willing to volunteer to take notes in the on-site tool?
Yeah, and actually that's on the next slide.
Sorry.
That's okay. If we jump to welcome and introductions, go forward 2 slides to slide 7. For the note scribe, we usually, what we've done in the past is we do look if anybody wants to start in the notes. It has our agenda usually preloaded in it. We're just looking if anyone's willing to capture action items in there, and we will upload that. Or we commonly take our minutes that from the automatic transcription, and we upload that as our minutes from the meeting. And that's what we submit for our notes. But it's always appreciated if someone would like to volunteer to put action items and collect them. And Rick, want to do that? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Rick.
Thank you.
I was, he often does that for us. We owe Rick a real round of, you know, thank you for that. He typically does that for us at these meetings. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so we've had actually quite a busy time since our last meeting in March. Yay for us. We had quite a lull there in terms of moving forward progress on a number of documents, but a number of things have come out of the RFC editor. We now have our proposed standard for reverse search, which I've always hated that name, speaking personally. Basically, what it does is the original RDAP specification, of course, has very limited searching abilities built into the protocol specification. This really does give you the ability to search on arbitrary elements of parts of the objects and information that's in the registration database and search on those. So that's a good thing. And it's good that we put that forward. The next one, RC 9537, is redaction. We're actually going to have some discussion about that in a little bit here. Principal motivation for the material discussion. No, we'll have a discussion on Wednesday about RDAP considerations. And it really is driven by having implemented this. And so we're going to need to have some discussion about what to do about some of the elements of that document. So hopefully you'll take some time to make sure to review that internet draft. There's been quite some discussion on the list, so I'm going to assume that most people are prepared to deal with that. And the last one, of course, yay, the open ID for RDAP. This document, for those who've been around a while, will know that it's kind of just been on a shelf for a long time for us. We've been waiting for a number of RDAP things to sort of come together and be done. So it's just been kind of hanging out there. But it finally got to a place where all the other baseline pieces that we needed in RDAP are now done. And so it seems appropriate now to be considering the space of authenticated queries in RDAP. So it was good to be able to get this document out there. We submitted it, last time, and it's good that we're able to move that forward and have that be a proposed standard so that work can begin on that space. So, okay, next slide. And now we'll look at the RFC editor queue, which we can quickly skip past because we have nothing at the moment in the RFC editor queue. Yay for us. Everything is out the door or on its way in. So skipping forward to slide 13, we have the slides that will be submitted to the ISG. We have one document which has now passed working group last call. It's just waiting. Last time I checked, and I didn't check today, so if it's been done today, I'm sorry, I didn't notice. But no, I'm sorry, I'm confusing this with something else. This document is with the ISG. It's already there, and the area director and the document editor are just going through a couple of details here, and then it will continue on its way in the ISG through the publication process. So this is past working group last call and past submission. So it'll shortly appear in the ISG, and hopefully this will move along quickly too. So next slide. Now we'll just look, this is where I thought I was, the past working group last call document on slide 15. We do have the clarification, the clarifying words for the EPP document, talking about deleting host objects. This is destined to be a BCP. This is the document which is just waiting for the document shepherd to prepare a write-up. Since we've already approved it to move forward, once we have that, we can submit it to the ISG, and then it will be in Ari's hands here. I'm zipping along kind of quickly here, but we're getting back on schedule. Please, if anybody wants to say anything or ask any questions about any of this, please do jump up and say something. Next, we have documents in working group last call. And there are two of them. We put them out there together once we clarified where we were with the last document and got that out of working group last call. We have the geofeed document for RDAP and extension, and we now have some additional search features for RARs for being able to look up IP numbers in the registration data. So these are, they will be on the standards track. That is the goal. Still looking for folks to indicate their support on the mailing list. Normally, we do a 2-week working group last call, but if you've noticed, we made these 3 weeks because they're covering this week. So the last call won't close until next Friday. But hopefully, if we get enough indications of support, or at least no objection, that's always important too. Please, you don't have to indicate if you're necessarily going to do anything with these things, but we do like to know that as many people as possible have at least read the documents and have no objection and believe they're consistent with what we do. So please do take some time to do that and indicate your support on the mailing list or no objection. Okay, moving on through the agenda and zipping through, we next have related work, and this is on the next slide here. So this is something that I wanted to call out. I believe a number of people in here are already aware of this work, but I do want to commend it to your attention if you haven't seen it and aren't aware of it. It has been a BOF. It is now a working group at this meeting. They had a meeting 2 sessions ago today where they were looking at their requirements document. And I put up here the problem statement on this slide just to make it visible for folks so that you can see what's going on here. This document, this work, one of the paths that this work could take is about a new resource record type. That is one of the ways in which what's going on in this problem statement could be implemented. Now, this has not been decided yet, but at least it's one of those things that's out there. And to the extent that that could happen, in fact, there's already a proposal for an EPP extension and an RDAP extension. These are just documents that were, made available and put out there and considered as part of looking at the requirements document. So they have not even been adopted by this working group yet. There is an interesting question as to whether or not these provisioning documents would be in this working group or in DELEG. I don't personally have a real preference about that, as long as whatever is done with these documents does include a close collaboration with us if they're not our documents. I think that that's fine. It's fairly straightforward what's going on here. But there's a lot of work that'll go on here. We're not there yet where these things matter to us, but I wanted to make sure that DELEG is on the radar of this working group. I know there's a few of us here who will be in that working group too, as well as here. So, we can watch and we'll see. And as they get to a spot where they're going to be considering these other documents, if they get there, then we will have a discussion about that here too. And Jim Reed, please, I see you at the queue.
Thanks, Jim. As I've said many times before, there aren't enough Jims in this working group. Just to follow on from what you said there, I think just about everybody that's in this room was actually in DELEG, but in case there are one or two that weren't, in case one or two people weren't in the DELEG session earlier, the expectation is that the requirements draft should be done in time for the next IETF in Dublin. I'm not sure if we're actually going to hit that target, but that's the plan at the moment. But there's no discussion at this stage yet about what the next stage of the protocol work is going to be. And one of those ideas might be a new resource record type. So we're not quite there yet. There's a couple of other potential scenarios being considered as well, but it's still early days.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And now we have David Lawrence coming up.
Hi, Tail. I actually just wanted to expand slightly on what Jim said. I wasn't sure whether he was going to cover it or not. So these proposals are based around the ones that are up on the screen right now are based around the original idea that we'd have a new RR type that sat at the parent side of the delegation on the owner name of the delegation. There is another very actively discussed proposal that the group is going to have to decide is whether it should in fact live in a special name under the delegation or under the parent zone, for example, example.underbardeleg.com for the example.com delegation information. So for those of you who haven't seen that discussion yet, I really encourage you, if you're interested in registry operations, to go ahead and, look up Willem Troop's talk about that from the DELEG working group, and then, participate with the ongoing discussion on the dd@ietf.org mailing list.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. You're talking about Willem gave the presentation in Deleg, right? Yeah. I thought that was really interesting too. Um, I appreciated that. I gave a short informational presentation in this working group 2 sessions ago because I was just observing that GTLDs have their own set of issues with this work if it goes forward with this plan. Alternatively, if they go down the path that Willem was proposing, then that's a much easier um, lift, if you will, and no direct concerns for registry operators on the GTLD side. But EPP will still need some updating and probably also RDAP, since you'll need to have a way to query what's going on. So I think this is important work. Oh, and we also have Jim Gould in the queue. So please, Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you answered my question. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yep, we hear you.
Yeah,
Yes, we
good.
can hear
Okay,
you.
yeah. Yeah, I'm assuming that those drafts are, not ready for serious consideration yet, and we shouldn't try to do any form of implementation yet. Is that correct?
I would say so, and I'm getting nods in the room, so yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But for those who like using the data tracker, you might want to put them on your track list and watch to see if anything ever happens with them. So, okay. There are no other questions or comments about Deleg, and I'm not seeing anything. Then we will move on, and we will get to the one material discussion that wanted to have today, and this is about registration implementations required. There is actually a separate slide deck, so if you're, maybe I should see if I can get slides here. Maybe it's possible that I can do that now.
What you should see is this, like here, and then.
Yeah, see, I don't see
You don't
that.
have that? Well,
Nope.
We'll figure it out later.
Yeah, okay, so long as you're
I'll
seeing
run
the slides.
I'll run them
Yeah.
now.
So for this discussion, Andy was kind enough, I guess he had started the discussion and then he and I had chatted. He was kind enough to put together these set of slides. They're intended to reflect a summary of the rather extended discussion that we had on the mailing list. And then we will have an open discussion in the room. And I will moderate that discussion and we'll see if we can get to a conclusion in all of this, at least in the room here, which we'll then have to take back to the mailing list and make sure everyone's included. So I think with that, it's okay, right? So
Yep.
go ahead, Andy.
Next slide. All right, so this is basically background on kind of how the IETF works. So to go from proposed standard to full standard, you need 2 independent implementations. But generally, to go from a draft to proposed standard, you don't, right? So, however, a working group or the IESG can make exceptions to that rule. So, depending on the circumstances, depending on, well, actually, I'm not really sure what the criteria is, but working groups can have certain standards, and then the IESG has its own process for that. So recently, if you follow the IETF discussion list, there was a whole, there's a thing about on mailmate. Some of that discussion kind of veered off into things people shouldn't have been saying, but essentially they put stuff in the chart, or they put something in the charter that says, we want some commitment to implement. So that was their idea of trying to make sure that they were working on stuff that was going to be implemented, right? But in that discussion, it was also pointed out that CyberOps and IDR also do something kind of differently. So they have requirements for 2 different independent implementations with a published implementation report. And so I believe in both of those working groups, that's not in their charter, it's just on their wiki, and it's just how the working group operates. And that's quite common. How a working group operates is sometimes not, or a lot of it's not actually in the charter. The charter is just really about what the scope of the working group is. Next slide. So I put this on the mailing list, and it's basically, hey, let's look at what CyberOps and what IDR are doing, and let's see if we can do the same thing. The proposal I put on the mailing list was actually to lower the bar from CyberOps and IDR, and it was not to have 2 different implementations, but to have one of both a client and a server. And so the original proposal, I was actually targeting RDAP, mostly because we seem to have a lot of contention there in the working group, at least on the mailing list. And so it's also, unlike EPP, serves 3 different constituencies. You know, the basic hope is that implementations help bring us together and that we can see how the things work versus just having esoteric arguments on the mailing list. It also helps us avoid surprises. Like, so we recently had a surprise with one of the extensions. And so the idea is that hopefully we can avoid any surprises. We could include EPP in this, and I'm just throwing this out there. I noticed that the latest EPP extension we have, the EPP TTL draft, which is now past working group last call, actually has implementations for both client and server. So that would put that in that category. The putting EPP in this is something we could think about. Like I said, the original proposal was really about trying to figure out how to stop the different viewpoints or the different people talking past each other when it comes to RDAP. Next slide. We did have quite a bit of conversation about the differences between the wiki and the implementation status section that you will see in many RFCs. One of them is that the wiki is actually easier for an implementer to update, especially if they're not the ID author or one of the authors. So an implementer can go in and update the wiki much more easily. The other thing is the implementation status section is actually removed from the RFC, from the draft when it goes to RFC. And so in a way, the wiki is actually more permanent. And I know that's kind of weird to say, but the way our process works, that's what it is. And I do encourage everyone to go look at what IDR does. They actually publish their reports on their wikis, and they're very thorough, and they go through every little thing, every little aspect of an implementation, and they talk about how this should be it. And the idea is that they're improving the quality of their documents, and I think that should be our aim as well.
Yeah. Before you change slides, or are you done with the slide, or
Almost done with the slide, yeah.
why don't you finish the slide?
So the idea with so it was pointed out that a lot of our documents do have an implementation section in there. And one of the benefits of the implementation section is that it does survive the different parts of the review process. So when a document is progressing from the working group to IETF last call to the IESG, you get to see it in there. And so one of the things we could do is we could look at a hybrid approach where we actually put a link to the wiki in the document, so it reminds people when you're reviewing this, go look at the wiki and see what's been done there. So Scott,
Scott, you have a clarifying question?
okay, all right, next slide. So the other part of this was, what happens if there are not enough implementations? And the idea was, hey, let's go ahead. If we have, if we've come to consensus in the working group, but it just hasn't been implemented, let's publish it as experimental. And then once there are implementations, we can bring it back in, take that implementation experience and publish it as proposed standard. This does, at least from my reading of the IESG guidelines, fall into what experimental means. But the other benefit there is the IETF retains change control of the specification. So if it's done independently, then the IETF does not have change control. Whereas if it's experimental, it still belongs to the IETF. And I do want to point out that even an experimental RFC does mean something. A lot of people kind of like, it's not proposed standard, but it does mean something. It was pointed out on the mailing list that both EPP and RDAP have open registries. So what that means is anyone can actually publish into those registries, take an extension and publish them, and they both, I believe, just require a stable publication point. So as long as the publication is readily available and open to everyone to read and it doesn't change, then you can put something into those registries. So that's the counter to that argument. Next slide. And this was put on the mailing list, and I wanted to bring it up. George Michelson has this quote on there about this becoming a de facto veto for incumbency. And I really hope George is somewhere around, he can talk to this. We talk about cabals and people with wrong think and whatnot. The intent of this is not to do that. The intent is to raise the quality of the regex documents. So if there's some other dynamic at play, I think we need to have an open and honest conversation about what that dynamic is. So I think that's the last slide. And you're going to moderate the discussion, right?
Yeah. Okay. So we do have a queue developing. I do want to frame a little bit of this discussion, I think, and then people can speak to this too, whatever comments that you want to add. We had quite some discussion on the mailing list. To me, this is a process discussion, and it really is directed about how this working group works and what we do or don't want to do. We have not been especially formal about requiring implementations. I guess we've been lucky in a way because all of the significant things we've done have actually had an implementation. So the question hasn't really come up and it hasn't been an issue. But now we're moving into a space with so many more things coming before us that to me, as chair, it's an interesting question to ask, gee, do we want to be a bit more formal about this and require it? And I see that as the essential question in this discussion. So I want to be careful to I don't want to repeat what has already happened, but that is the question which I would hope we can come to a conclusion to in this session. If you think that's the wrong question to ask, then you should please speak to that too. But that's where I think we need to go. And with that, we'll start walking down the queue. So Scott, you're up first.
Thank you, Jim. Scott Hollenbeck. So let me start by saying I've got mixed feelings. So some of what I'm saying is going to ramble here a little bit, okay? One of the reasons that the routing groups do this is because the risk of breakage for what they are doing is a lot higher, in terms of there being catastrophic damage done than if something happens with an EPP spec or an RDAP spec. So I think we need to recognize that. The bar should be higher if internet routing suddenly stops working because of a specification issue. So that's probably why they are doing something good. Okay, maybe it doesn't apply to us. On our side, we have had a couple of issues where we've been stalemated on a couple of topics and they just haven't gone anywhere. And I think Andy's got a good point that maybe if we can't reach consensus on a certain approach to do something, well, we have not met that bar for advancing the draft to propose standard status. And so if it makes more sense to publish a document as experimental such that we can learn a little bit more about what it is, how to implement it, how it works, that seems like a good thing to do. Okay. Okay. Point number 3. We're a small group. One of the reasons I think we run into these difficulties in establishing consensus situations is that if you've only got 2 or 3 people who are actively engaged in a conversation, it can be very difficult to get a measure of consensus when you've got 2 people on one side, 1 on another, or even worse, 1 on one side, 1 on another. And there's no way to break the stalemate. So I don't know how this solves that problem. And then the last thing I think I want to touch on, given the size of the group, recognizing that we are, for the most part, more heavily weighted toward server-side implementers, right? RDAP in particular, I'm only aware of 2 entities in this room that have done any client implementation. And so somewhat along the lines of what Andy was alluding to, George saying, if we don't manage to get a client implementer on board for any particular specification, things might not happen, either because they don't have the time at any given moment to do implementation work, or they disagree with it, and we can't find a client implementer that is willing to step up. Again, not that I'm saying, no, I think it's a bad idea, but I think these 2 are things that we need to consider. Thank you.
No, thank you for all of that. I mostly want to take notes for a little while, but I want to add a little bit of context to one of the things that you were saying. You commented about us being a small group, and yeah, that has always been a problem. I've been, co-chair of this group since its inception, and the way that I have always characterized this with our area directors when running this group is, yes, it's really a small handful of people who do most of the work, measured even on one hand most of the time. I mean, there's a little bit of in and out. Now, the group has grown a little bit since then, and it is kind of a problem, or maybe not. We've been fortunate so far in that we seem to get to consensus pretty quickly with our small group. But you're right, Scott. Lately, we have suddenly found ourselves in a bit of a stalemate, and I've always been nervous about that, and that's part of the reason why we sort of stall. I mean, yeah, we stall if we can't, or at least I have forcibly just stalled things, because if our small group isn't together, that's just not a good thing. I struggle with the notion of declaring consensus just because 3 out of 5 people like something. There's only 5 people who are looking at it. I can't do that. I mean, I just feel whichever side of that coin I happen to be on individually, I just feel as chair, it's inappropriate to move something forward. So something to think about in terms of how we work. Is this we really have 2 choices. One is this notion of using experimental more, or maybe we just abandon the work and say, if we can't get consensus, let somebody do it as an individual work. So I offer that up there as something to think about in this discussion too. So I apologize. Peter, you're up next.
Thank you, Jim. Peter Koch, DENIC. And for full disclosure, it's an open secret that DENIC doesn't use EPP, but I think we come close. And in the end, this is not a technical question, but a process, as you alluded to. So to the best of my knowledge, this rule that was quoted for IDR and CyberOps has been an area-wide rule for the routing area for a couple of decades maybe, and the reasons have been given by Scott already. When I saw the suggestion by Andy that the bar should be lowered and a client and a server implementation would suffice, then I wonder, the nature of the routing protocols is that 2 interoperable are usually 2 independent implementations, whereas the client and the server might not necessarily be independent. So the question is, what's the proof here? Somebody came up with a specification and proved that their own implementation works with each other, and that might not be sufficient and may not be what you want here. The other observation or question is, implementation is one thing, and yes, the specification usually points at the implementer/vendor, but in this space, it's a significant overlap with policy questions. So when we go to this TTL thing, having the client determine the TTL in the parent zone for a particular record set, that is also something that needs to be reflected in the respective policy. So willing to implement, at least on the server side, is not equivalent to, but maybe a precondition for willing to deploy. And maybe the deployment is, which includes do whatever policy process may or may not be necessary, depending on whether you are a G or a C, or where you deployed. So the ask would be to maybe distinguish between the 2, because what you, Jim, in your comment pointed out is that it's a small set of people that would determine these things, because yeah, the participation isn't broader than that, and maybe doesn't reach too well into the registrar/reseller space, which might be another observation. So that's where the improvement lies. Thank you.
So thank you. And just to add on that last point about, it is a small group, but one of the things that I, in particular as an individual and sitting in the role as chair, I've tried to make a point of doing is that we do get at least a voice in every impacted stakeholder, I'll say. So, a registry, a registrar, a couple different registries if necessary, a DNS person. I mean, I'm trying not to have something which a smaller group of people is causing changes in other people who didn't have a voice. So we do try to do our part, and there's a few of us. I'm not the only one who does that, but there are other people here. We try to help each other out and get there. Okay, Jim Gould, you're next. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I don't support this proposal for a process change, but I have 3 reasons for it. First off, I don't see the problem that is being fixed. I believe the working group has done a good job related to encouraging implementations and including them in the drafts. I, in particular, have implemented the EPP extensions for each of the working group drafts. So I believe that one of the solutions here may be more encouragement for the RDAP extensions for client implementation and do it earlier. When I do the EPP implementations, I do it as early as I can so I can incorporate that feedback into the drafts. The second mirrors what Scott had said. When I posted the message to the mailing list related to client implementers for RDAP, Mark was the only one that replied because I explicitly brought his name up. So there's really not that many implementers out there that we could really help address this. And then third is going with the experimental to start. I believe you're going to discourage participation. I mean, businesses are the ones that are funding for participation in the working group, and we don't want to get to a point where the bar is so high that businesses would prefer to create proprietary extensions, and that would hurt the working group itself and the entire industry. So I would just recommend that we encourage more implementations earlier in the process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Next up, Jody Coker.
Hi, this is Jody Colker. Can you hear me all right?
Absolutely.
All right. So my concern, I think I'm going to echo a lot of what everyone else has said, so I'll be very brief. I'm concerned about how many people we have in the group and who will be doing the implementation. You know, it seems that we have a hard time getting people to comment on drafts, but now we're going to have them actually implement some of these. And I know that we're all under a lot of pressure here to produce things for a company, and timelines are short and roadmaps are full. So trying to find time to squeeze into there to get an implementation done so that we could get a proposed standard through is going to be tough. I think that some companies won't actually do any of the implementations until it is a standard because they don't want to rewrite it again. And I think it's just going to take a lot to be able to work on that. So, I mean, I guess that's my first point, is that we just doesn't seem like we have enough people in here to be able that will volunteer their time to do the implementations. And then when we talk about client and server implementations, I mean, can one company do, or one person do both the client and the server part of that? And then does that count as an implementation, or do you have to have two separate people do it so that you don't have the same person working on it? I just think there's some things that need to be clarified in there before I move forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jody. Rick Wilhelm.
Thanks, Rick Wilhelm, PIR. I also don't support this change. I think that we want to be in a position where we're encouraging RDAP adoption and usage, and I think that this sort of a thing actually moves the meter in the other direction, because it actually makes it harder for people. It discourages investment in RDAP because it makes it harder for extensions to get developed, and actually discourages people from working on standards track things. And like Jim Gould said, actually would encourage people to be working towards a proprietary extension and not even moving towards a standards track extension due to a possible requirement of having to get multiple implementations. I think we want to be instead working on cultivating and growing the client universe and encouraging adoption in that way. So as Jim said, as Jim and also Scott said, I don't think that this helps the kind of situation that we're doing. We're the kind of thing that we've got going on here is just we're early on in the RDAP days in the client side game. And I think that we need to work on encouraging the environment in other ways, not by making it harder for people to work on RDAP things and get them into production. Thank you.
Thank you. Um, Jazdip, please, you jumped in the queue. Go ahead.
Hi, Jasdeep Singh, Erin. I think this is a very interesting discussion. Um, and it happens to be that both EPP and RDAP are already internet standards. So it's a very unique group in the sense that we are writing extensions for things which are already internet standards. So I think all said and done, as a better way of working, I do like the idea of implementation wiki. Um, how we go about doing it, because think about it, even if some of these things become eventually standard, they're standard tracks and they eventually become internet standards, you're gonna at some point need that. And to Rick's point about growing the ecosystem, especially the client side, because which is the point which Scott also made, that's pretty critical because so there are some full feature clients and then there are some unique space clients. Um, and I'm not saying that the barrier of entry should be so high that suddenly it discourages people from coming out with new things, right? Uh, but as a better way of working, I think at least introduce that as a sort of a internal measure or standard where you're like, I want better quality. And especially the point is that clients should not be surprised. Implementers shouldn't be surprised. So if some way we can introduce or learn from other working groups, or when and how, what are their criteria for introducing these implementation wikis, that would be awesome. So that's all.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any other hands jump up.
We have 10 minutes left.
Yeah. So let me add a couple of comments from my own personal perspective in all of this. So, chair hat off, if you will. When this discussion first started, very early on in the mailing list, I made a particular observation, which is that, the registries for the IANA registries for EPP extensions and RDAP extensions are essentially first come, first serve. The only requirement is that you have a stable documentation for it. So folks don't have to come to the IETF in the first place in order to get things looked at. Now, if they do want to get on the registry, sure, the REGEXT mailing list and the designated experts are still going to get a request for the review. But the only real purpose of that review is to make sure that it's not in conflict with anything else that's out there and otherwise meets a sensible form and presentation for what it is. But there's no, substance analysis of it that's intended. So you can do whatever you want anyway. I just want to put that back out there and remind us of that fact. Coming back as chair, I guess I want to say three things. I see this problem as really having two parts. A discussion about implementation of documents that come before us and a discussion about review of those documents that come before us. And I really am concerned in a way that since we're really dealing with extensions to RDAP and EPP, we're dealing with things which we would like to know that I think this group would like to know, this working group should want to know that everything fits together, that we're not creating conflicts with what we're agreeing is relevant to exist. I've always felt that judging the quality of a particular proposed extension, whether or not it's relevant and useful for the internet at large, is probably just a bridge too far. Part of that is because sometimes there are some extensions for which that matters, but for some extensions, it really is it's a small group of people. It's serving the needs of a group of people. And the only thing that this group really cares about, I would assert, is that whatever is being used by that small group of people isn't going to conflict with other extensions or with the standards in their base specification. And I think that we want to check that. So, I mean, look at the couple of extensions that have been just recently put up. I mean, even the TTL extension, GeoFeed extension, you know, that kind of stuff. It's like they're not something that everybody is going to do. And I'm struggling with the idea that we should even require that any number of people do them, or that we should check them. I mean, I know that for me personally, documents come through with specifications for things. I do take them back internally, and I ask for implementers to look at them, tell me what they think. I don't ask them to implement it, but I like to get, you know, another technical opinion about whether this thing is good or not. But I don't feel obliged to implement it. And I'm not sure that we should be the implementation police in that respect for extensions that don't, you know, help, which are not for everybody. They're for a small group of people. So now we have a few people jumping into the queue. I was going to propose a conclusion, but now that I've made some interesting comments, let's get some other voices in here before we try to come up. Time check, we got 8 minutes left. Scott, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Jim. Scott Hollenbeck again. And actually, I got in the queue before you started talking, so. Anyway, I very, very much like the idea of using the wiki to document some, you know, this implementation experience. I mean, I agree with Andy completely about, you know, the necessity for persistence. I think it's valuable, you know, for us to capture some of this. And I don't know if anyone has actually taken a look at the wiki ever. I know I have, and when you do, you'll go and see something I put there. I don't know how long ago. I can't even remember what it is, but that goes to show you just how infrequently we have paid any attention to it, and I do think that needs to change. So no matter what we decide to do with this discussion, the idea of using that wiki to help capture implementation experience, I think is a good one, and I would very much like to see that happen. Two, just a note, we have always had the ability to kind of consider the status of documents on the fly, so to speak, because very few of the documents that we work on appear as chartered milestones, right? So we don't have to go look at our charter and where it says produce document X as a proposed standard, right? So we don't have that contract with the community. And so if we ever find ourselves in a situation where we, you know, cannot come to consensus, you know, as I said earlier, on publishing a document as a proposed standard, I think one of the arrows that we should have in our quiver is this idea of, okay, well, if we cannot come to consensus, maybe it just makes sense to publish a document as experimental, right? And we can use that to help break some of the log jams that we've been experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Gould, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to take an action on and take a look at the wiki myself. I have not used it, but what I was going to say was it would be useful for the client and server implementers to be included maybe on the wiki somewhere, so therefore we don't have to put a message out to the list to ask for those implementers. We can just reach out. That would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Powell, you're up next.
Paul Koalik-Denik. I will be also supporting the idea of using wiki more to document the implementations, to have maybe not formal bar defined for proceeding with this drafts, but at least full transparency when reaching consensus. What is the implementation status? And depending on the complexity of the draft, it may be that implementation is not needed, but if it's brave new idea with completely new protocol interactions, it probably is a good idea to maybe take some time for implementation.
Okay, thank you. And Rick Wilhelm, going to make you last here, and I'm going to lock the queue verbally, even though I can't seem to do it personally. Go ahead, Rick.
Rick Wilhelm, PIR. So you had started, you made the comment that, you know, you said the whole idea of extensions is that their appeal is limited. Their utility is sometimes very targeted. I'm thinking to a number of extensions that we have in EPP land, some that, you know, sometimes I've been at companies and we've done them and they're only useful for our particular situations. and that I can think of different lanyards that I've been wearing at work, not that, but my different name tags, and I've come up with a couple of 3 extensions. I've been thinking, like, if it were EPP land, I'd be like, well, our extension wouldn't make it, right? And then it wouldn't be an EPP, it wouldn't be an IETF, it'd be a proprietary thing. And this is dating back, you know, to the early aughts. And so I think that really a number of comments that a lot of people have made, the ones that you made right here at the end are maybe the most compelling reasons, candidly, to, you know, it goes along the lines of a comment that Jim Gould made, where he said something to the effect of tagging these things experimental will deter adoption, right? And what you said kind of rhymed with that, which is, look, these things kind of have limited appeal, or they're targeted for a particular business problem or operational problem or something like that. And that's why they're extensions, and they're not part of the main draft. That's the whole idea, that they're an extension, because if they weren't an extension, you would just incorporate it in the main body of the work. And so I think that that's why we were kind of messing with the idea of what it means to be extension. So that's, I think, plus oneing your point that you made earlier about, like, we shouldn't be passing too harsh of judgment and requiring a ton of broad implementations on these things, because they are particularly limited by design. Thank you.
Okay. I'm showing 3 minutes left. I do want to try to end on time. I'm going to make 4 suggested actions out of this, which really fall to me to make happen, and try to summarize this discussion. I'll send this to the mailing list. So if anyone has any strong, just real objections to all of this, then we'll continue the discussion. But I'd like to think that we can close this off here and come to this. So first, I'm not sensing any real consensus for changing our implementation requirements in this working group for our work. What I would suggest, though, is that there are times when we may choose to want to have implementations. I mean, I can think of a couple of examples of extensions that have come around, like the fee extension that we had years ago. That was kind of important to get implemented by a few people in EPP because it was broadly useful, you know, for example. Other extensions do tend to be targeted, and I think that, you know, we shouldn't overwhelm ourselves with that. So I think not changing our overall process is the right thing, but we will from time to time choose to make targeted requirements for implementations. And that's just going to be a judgment call on us. But I think that we're capable of doing that. The second thing is, along the way here was a discussion about, yeah, we have hard enough trouble getting people to review documents, and that is still a problem, but I think that's a good focus. We should stick with our focus there. We put a lot of effort into reminding people to please review documents, indicate your support, make sure that you've done it. Again, you know, extensions, they're first come, first serve, people. I think that we let communities do what they want to do. We just want to make sure they're not interfering with everything else that's going on. And that's our role, and that's what the reviews need to accomplish. So let's continue with that. Third thing, clearly there's some support, at least for the wiki. I happen to personally like that too. I think we should seek to try to make greater use of the wiki and see if we can't get more information about implementations of everything. Whatever we can get, we should certainly try to get that documented. So I'll take that as an action to follow up even with my co-chair, and we'll try to advertise that and push on that in the working group. And then the fourth thing, we do have a process issue of what to do about stalemates. And, you know, as chair, in many ways, I'll admit, I've kind of, you know, left stalemates and I let them languish and work doesn't move because, you know, I don't even know what to do about something and how to deal with that. You know, I guess part of this discussion was, well, maybe we could take advantage of experimental as a way to get past a stalemate. I'll take that as something to consider. I think that's a fair, constructive comment to the working group in general. And so I will certainly put that in the toolbox of a way to look at things. If we can't get our small group of people to all agree on something, then maybe the path is, well, let something go off and be something. But I want to be a little cautious about that because, again, the other opportunity here is maybe it doesn't have to be a working group product. I think that that's a question we'll always have to ask ourselves. Because keep in mind, you know, again, the registries for extensions are first come, first serve. It doesn't have to go through the working group. It doesn't have to be a working group product. So, you know, we'll take advantage of using experimental when we can. Or maybe we redirect people into an informational state and let them go put the document, their extension out there anyway, and then see what happens with it, and we'll go from there. So I'll add this to the toolbox of things of how to deal with stalemates, because I think that's important and helpful to us.
Just one note, for the proposals to make any process changes, we should make sure we run that on the list so that, you know, folks who are remote, who can't be here with us today, that they have a chance to review. So if you could write up, you know, like what you just said, make sure that in the
Yeah.
list summary, we can confirm that. And then the other note, you know, with my AD hat on, I'm here to support you in this process. So if you want milestones, I can help you with milestones. If you guys decide that you want to apply processes or you want to consult or adopt any patterns that other areas have already looked at, I'm happy to go speak to those area directors and learn, you know, what worked for them. So you have me as a resource in addition to your chair up here. Thank you for everything. Any other closing remarks?
No, I think that's it. There wasn't any other business opportunity, but we're past time here. But I will, anybody want to raise their hand? You got any other business? Otherwise, we'll see you on Wednesday. We have our 2-hour session on technical details. And not seeing anything in the queue. Well, the queue is,
Queue's locked now.
it's locked, but anybody could have put a hand up still.
Thank
So,
you.
But thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate it. It's been a very good discussion, very helpful. And I hope that closes that off. Thanks. All right. Wait for me, man. There's no way to turn that sucker off.
Yeah, it'll be hot for a while.
When we first came in the room, this thing was transcribing something. We didn't do it here.
I don't
We
know.
had no idea where that mic was coming from. That was weird. So, yes, I actually upped it to 20 in the slides. I updated the agenda, which I posted just before